Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. The new campaign is out. It's really good. There's some pretty fantastic art to it, pretty decent story overall, and yeah, Hour of Glass turned out to be a charmer. I really like it. I'd place it second underneath Dead Reckoning, but I think that it is a pretty consistent experience overall, and I like the way that they went in for the campaign. So there's some pretty cool stuff going on with it. I thoroughly recommend it. We definitely had a fun time with it, and there's some new cards that we're going to be discussing. So let's get a first look at these cards and see how we feel about each of them, whether or not we think they're going to be good in Expedition or Throne, and just sort of like how we feel about the design, how we feel about the art, the lore, all of that kind of stuff. First things first, League Explorer, 2/2 charge for 2. When League Explorer attacks, you play a depth charge. So these are the Malaga League Explorers most likely. They are going to be basically the people who are descending into the Down Dark to sort of explore the Shadowlands and do other interesting things. Them coming with depth charges is not a particularly explorer-like thing, but yeah, so there's not like a real match to like lore and ability here, but nonetheless, they are a very powerful card. So this is a 2/2 with charge, which reasonably statted for a charge unit. I mean, Blazing Renegade from the original set was a 2/1 with charge for 2, and that was like an acceptable aggro card at the time. League Explorer is a 2/2 with charge and an extra bonus option, so that makes it like a reasonable throne choice for aggro, because it actually has just a lot of things going for it in terms of like its general value and also the value of being a charge unit. It's enough of a like extra 2-cost charge unit that you might even be able to do stuff like Charge Rod again. I think that's kind of an interesting thing to access. So yeah, this card I think is powerful enough for Throne, and in Expedition it's also a very good card, though it doesn't scale up tremendously high. The main thing about it is that it is nonetheless like a card that has potential to be like bonkers broken under the right circumstances, because those depth charges are a pretty real thing. The depth charges read, at the end of your turn, if you have no card in hand, sacrifice depth charge to deal 2 damage to the enemy player. And it notably appears to be a relic and not a cursed relic, which is important to note because basically that means that you can defend against it with a single Aegis, but your opponent has some control, of course, over when they get to blow up all of their stuff, because they get to spend their last card in hand and then sacrifice the charge. But League Explorer is a 2/2 that can easily build up like an obliterate and damage pretty quickly, or even just like an extra detonate. And that's something that you'd really want on a 2/2 charge aggro card. This is really fast, really damaging card that accumulates relics at a really fast speed, sacrifices relics at a pretty fast speed, and like both of those things are very good. Like it's doing some interesting synergy stuff because playing relics is actually pretty real for a number of different reasons. Notably, this pairs in Rakano with the green 2/1 that when you play a unit or you play a relic, it gets +2/+2. That's a 6/5. This ends up being something that enables it at 2, and you can trigger it multiple times in a row. Also, if you empty your hand, you're very likely to deal enough extra damage to make a 2/2 charge super worth it. So this is a really efficient tempo card. I'd say this card is really strong. Obviously, there is some potential for small cards like this to get outpaced by certain things. Cover from the Storm, Cyber Combustion. In certain red decks, these types of things are not going to be like ridiculous, and they are competing at the moment with stuff like the Anglo Houndmaster and some of the like 2 attack stuff options in Expedition. So there are places where this card, I think, gets replaced by other options in aggro, but I think it's a really strong aggro tool on its own that feeds a lot of different interesting aggro decks and can function in just any sort of red deck. So if you're playing, like, if you're a first-time player, you're picking the game up, League Explorer is actually a pretty good place to start with a red aggro deck. You just build something with a lot of cheap red units that have charge, and League Explorer will do a lot of the rest of the work for you. So super solid card. Really fits in a lot of different decks. I would give it like a plus for power level. It's quite good. Awakened Arsonist. Stealth. When Awakened Arsonist hits the enemy player, draw a card. Discard it at the end of your turn. Oh, we should discuss power levels and stuff, because we rank on kind of like, we're trying a grading scale at the moment. So like an S card is basically like super broken. We know that it's broken, and it's probably gonna have to get nerfed or something along those lines. Or it's just like insanely pushed, and it's going to be like the meta definer. Like it's just going to be in every deck. A is a card that is very likely to be meta defining, or like at least something that we would say is like just so good in the deck it is in that it is like guaranteed to be in a meta deck, I would say. Those cards are quite good. B cards generally, like, you know, they have really solid stuff. They maybe don't belong in a specific deck all the time, or they are a little too specific and therefore don't get played quite as often. C cards, you really need like a very specific type of deck to get it running, but at that point it might perform admirably, or maybe it's just an average card with an average power level that just fills pretty well in a couple of things, but doesn't really like make the deck work beyond just being like a really good card in that slot. And then D cards, you know, those are cards that are kind of like failing to do their jobs or not really effectively like functioning all that well. Like maybe if you have a very hyper specific deck, you take them. F cards are cards that like in the deck that they are designed for don't work, and those are ones that we generally like really don't like. Yeah, so I think I've been starting on grading scales, but I haven't actually explained my grading scale before, so I think I should sort of do that. In any case, Awakened Arsonist is a 3-cost stealth unit. It says when it hits the enemy player, you draw a card. Discard it at the end of your turn, which, you know, reasonable little effect on a 2/1. Like, I would say this card is like a little bit small for what it's doing, but it does have the entomb deal 1 damage ability, which is generally a pretty powerful ability. That is something that will typically pick off small units that your opponent doesn't want you to pick off, so there's a good chance that Awakened Arsonist is a card that your opponent has to make some decisions about whether or not to let through or not. So yeah, we are generally trying to look and see if we can actually get something going that will really help out with that. I think this card is a little too understated to be like particularly effective overall. Like this is a card that like seems more like D power level to me. It doesn't seem like it's something that would go very well in Throne. And like overall, I think it's just doing a little bit too little. But that entomb deal 1 damage ability, like that does provide you with some interactivity in Expedition, and it also punishes people who play spells on Awakened Arsonist. So if you're trying to hide your stealth units and punish stealth attacks, then this is something that is pretty nice to cycle into your deck lists, because it means that you can potentially make like that time deck think twice about playing like a Defile or something like that, or a Xenon deck think twice about playing a Defile. People will still be able to silence this, and if it gets silenced, then oof, that's a pretty rough card. Yeah, overall, like, it's interesting. I think it's kind of a little unusual. I'm not a big fan of the design overall, particularly because it violates a rule of red cards, which is that all red cards currently have a thing where basically they always reveal themselves at the start of the turn. I'm pretty sure that's true of all the major red cards, with stealth, that is. A rule of red cards with stealth. Like, I'm not sure if that's true of the legendaries as well, but like, in general, that's been sort of the case. It doesn't matter as much since it's kind of a draft rule anyways, but, you know, so you can break that rule. It's certainly doable, and like, you know, now that's a thing that happens, but people are going to know what this is, most likely, if it doesn't reveal itself at the start of your first turn. So when you attack with it, you know, they might have a better idea of what it is, particularly if you're in mono red. So take note of that, because yeah, it's the only red card that doesn't reveal itself at the start of turn. Test of Metal. The end of the cursed player's turn, if they didn't play a card with cost 1 or more, sacrifice Test of Metal to deal 10 damage to them. Otherwise, you increase that cost by 1. So this is pretty interesting, right? This is a lot of damage for a very low cost. And it doesn't take that many of them to just completely wreck your opponent. I think the overall like little lore aspect of it is pretty nice. Like it's just basically D'Angelo testing Talir, or so, you know, like some neat little things going on there. Or not the D'Angelo, isn't it? The Malagas. But yeah, like, yeah, this card has some disadvantages. It's not going to be particularly strong in Throne because Face Aegis is just going to be a little bit too uncommon. I'm pretty sure that if you play the curse on them, you still have to sacrifice the Test of Metal to like pop the Aegis. So if they play an Aegis over the curse, like I think they can prevent the damage that way, which means that there's some good ways to prep for this card or counter out this card's damage, and also you can just destroy the relics. So yeah, there's a lot of things that kind of make this maybe not as good as it seems in terms of the overall damage that it's offering. The main one being that a lot of decks can just continue to play cards and delay this card's ability by several turns, maybe turn 8 or turn 9, and in the process, kill you. So yeah, it's notable that this card is going to take a lot of work to actually pull off, but combined with good discard or some sort of like particularly aggressive strategy, if you're using Danglo Arson, for example, and Exploit and a bunch of other stuff, you can get this triggering pretty quickly. You might even be able to get it going like basically within a turn, as long as you can just basically like empty your opponent's hand first, which isn't actually all that hard. Exploit into Danglo Arson, play a Test of Metal. If your opponent was playing aggro, they may just take 10 damage. That's pretty wild. But then, of course, 10 damage is not enough to kill them. You actually have to be doing other damage too. So you can see why you might need a full hand of cards to really get Test of Metal working. I'd say this is like CC plus power level. It's a cool card for sure, and it definitely provides you with something that's like really, really strong if you get the right type of deck for it. So, maybe even like a B-. But overall, it's not insanely strong, and I think it's really, really bad in Throne, where face aegises are just super prevalent. Repel Darkness. Draw a sigil of your choice, or one of your units can't die this turn, or put an enemy unit or spell that was played from the top of the void this turn on the bottom of their deck. Okay, fast spell Sigil, that's pretty good. One of your units can't die this turn, that's a reasonable effect that gives you card advantage. And put an enemy unit or spell that was played from the void this turn on the bottom of their deck, that matters less. Notably, it is a Repel Davia, so keep that in mind, because if somebody plays a Davia Voidbreaker and pulls a spell out of their void, you can counter that spell with Repel Darkness, which is something that is a nice little bonus. I think that there are some decent things about this, but this is a card that you're most frequently going to be using as a 2-cost Seek Power in time at fast speed, which really not too bad. Fast speed Seek Power is still a really good card, I would say. The card always provides you with card advantage because whatever it's doing, it will at least kill one card. If you use it on one of your units can't die this turn, well, it's not a card advantage, but it's fairly card neutral. Repel Darkness either draws a card, which is great, or it negates a card, which is great. It always trades card for card. It never goes down a card, which is generally pretty decent. Overall, I'd say this is a reasonable fast spell that has like some really, really good utility, belongs in a lot of different decks, and can actually be a really effective counterspell for time. But like whether or not you're going to be using it to counter out Void strategies in Throne, I'm a little more skeptical of. There's a couple of Void Hate cards here in Throne. I think there have been a lot of Void Hate cards printed, but the main thing about them is that like most of the time it's just a question of like whether or not you're actually going to be playing it in Throne, where everything is already like ridiculous and everything you do needs to have like insane synergy. This is a card that I can see being pretty good in Expedition and pretty okay in Throne, just because it is fast spell Seek Power, and that is something that you actually need. Any seeking at 1 or 2 is really playable. This card's like a B power level. Lucent Guide. 5/5 stealth, ultimate pay 7 and reveal Lucent Guide to play an Illumination Wisp, then gain 1 health for each of your units. The entomb is to play 2 Illumination Wisps. This one's rough. I think it's pretty bad overall. So the ultimate ability is pay 7, which is a lot, and also you have to pay 5 for it first, so you're paying 12 to play a 1/3 endurance flyer. That's what Illumination Wisp. It's a little token that has 1/3 and endurance, and that's pretty much all it does. So that's already like kind of rough. Like it's not an amazing setup there. The 1/3 Illumination Wisp is kind of okay. The Entomb effect on it is actually pretty good because you get the both of those units, but like silencing a unit in response to it getting played is actually really, really common, I think, particularly on 5 costs that are stealth, because basically like that's something where you really need to know what the unit is, but it's very likely to have a rough entomb or some sort of other ability, so playing a silence on it is one of the most effective ways to reveal it anyways. If this card actually does play the 2 Illumination Wisps after soaking a Death Strike or something, then you get some mild units that are okay at like maybe pushing for reach. I would say this is not like super, super strong in its own niche though, because like by and large, like this is either gaining you, 5 to 10 life for 7, which is super not great overall. Like you paid 12 for that, and in total, and it cost you a ton of tempo, and you have a 5/5 on the board and 2 flyers that kind of don't hold up. Whereas the Entomb ability is like, yeah, if you played this to try to basically like counter out a Death Strike and like hide your Zindole or something like that, maybe that's a little bit better, but I have a hard time seeing this card getting played at all. I would give it like a D in Expedition and a D- in Throne. It's super rough, and I don't think it really plays very much. Yeah, interesting though. Interesting. Waystone Core, our very first fast relic. Note that the fast relic is in green. I believe they put that as a marker just because they really, really wanted you to know that relics can be fast now, and this relic in particular is fast. I think that's pretty interesting. So, this is pay 5. You get +0 maximum power, and then at the end of the enemy turn, it gets +1 maximum power. Then if you have 5 or more, sacrifice to draw 5 cards. So you play this at the end of your opponent's turn. It immediately gets the +1 maximum power, and you jump from 5 to 7 on a turn where you were basically holding up some counter spells or something along those lines. In draw go, like Temporal Waystone type stuff, if you want to play like interesting, ridiculous shenanigans, I think this actually kind of fits pretty well in the deck that it's in. It's a good throne card. It's a good expedition card. It's obviously a really slow card and a pretty minimal play in terms of tempo and what kind of things that you want to do. But if your goal is to hold on to a lot of different cards and also play some really big expensive stuff like Channel the Tempest, basically, if you're a Channel the Tempest deck, this is the type of card that really supports that strategy because it gives you additional maximum power pretty quickly. Notably, there are some issues where, like, eventually you do get up to that 5 or more. You sacrifice to draw a bunch of cards. At that point, you should have enough power in your hand to sort of have replaced the power that Waystone Core is generating, but it's possible that that will affect you negatively if there are other things that are, like, kind of hurting you. And also there are ways that the card get destroyed at the wrong times, so it might not provide you with the card advantage that you're super looking for. But overall, I think in a Spells Matter deck, like a Davia deck or something along those lines, this card seems like a solid B, I would say, both in Expedition and in Throne. It doesn't necessarily define those decks, but it is a pretty strong choice if you want to get yourself up into those 8s and 9s and really start doing some ridiculous damage. And it plays pretty well in even like some of the bigger like time decks that just want to jump from 5 to 7 and not do anything at 6. So if you were really, really looking to play that 8/8 with Valor and Endurance and Overwhelm and all of the other ridiculous shenanigans, and why wouldn't you be, this is a pretty good card to get up to that without really having to interact with your opponent at all. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Clearly tempo inefficient, clearly going to hurt you if you're playing it in a deck where you just don't have any way to kill the opponent, but in like the Xenon decks that have harsh rules, in the Elysian decks that have Cover from the Storm and Davia and all of that shenanigans, in decks that really have ways to clear the board already and have good stuff at the top to get to, this is a card that really, really fits in very well. So yeah, very specific types of decks, but really high power level in those decks. Stayer's Eyes. 2/2 flyer. Summon, you may discard a card to play on an Adjudicator's Gavel, a Lingering Influence, or a Crown Watch tactic. So, Stayer's Eyes is a card that like feels like it shouldn't be very good just because you're looking at it and you're like, oh, none of these cards are very strong, and also the stat line's not strong, and also this isn't strong. But like looking at it more closely, that everything about it is actually like really, really solid. It's 2/2 flyer for 2, which is pretty unreasonable stat line most of the time. There are not that many 2/2 flyers for 2, and this one is a Valkyrie, which I think there are 0 of. There are very, very few 2-cost Valkyries, and so just like thinking about whether or not I'd put this in like a Throne Ikaria deck, which is sort of like my very baseline for like what a reasonable Throne deck looks like, this is something that like absolutely I would. Yeah, no, the card allows you to play into your 3rd power very easily because it plays Lingering Influence, which allows you to draw a Justice Sigil, which is super, super fun, and also gives you that nice little bonus Scout as well. The Adjudicator's Gavel is nice for shutting off your opponent's Void, which is, you know, minor benefit, but like can be really, really important in Throne because you're just trying to do that constantly. And then the Crown Watch tactic on top of it is something that's just like a nice little bonus if you are ailing against aggro or having to deal with other stuff, or even if you're going to have like a turn where you're just like on 6 and you want to play like a Mantle of Justice on something and stabilize, then yeah, Steyer's Eyes is really, really strong on all of those counts. So card has really, really good modality. It's really, really well statted. It's a really relevant subtype, and it also is a power fixer on top of a unit. That's a lot of things to like about this card. I would rate this at like maybe an A+. I think this card should just go in green decks, because the ability to go from 2 to 3 is one of the most important things that you need in an opening hand in Eternal, and being able to do that while playing a 2/2 flyer and scouting on top of that means that Styre's Eyes is a Valkyrie with a crest. I mean, that's sweet. That's a really, really good effect. And yeah, this card seems just bonkers powerful. In Expedition, it's clearly a really, really strong choice that will get you just amazing fixing and amazing consistency in your green decks. In Throne, like, yeah, you're pretty happy to play this in Valkyries, and it belongs in that type of deck specifically, but it also has that nice Void Shutdown thing in an attempt to keep Throne Void shenanigans from getting completely out of control. I don't really know what the Throne meta is like, but based on what I'm seeing in the responses to it in cards, I would say that Void shenanigans are maybe a little bit too powerful, and printing card nerfs is definitely something that they're trying to do. So yeah, looks like something that's pretty interesting. I think that this card clearly provides you with a lot of different useful options. The only thing I don't like about it is the art, and I guess that might mostly be the premium version, although yeah, those goggles are a little bit crazy. Still, cool card, interesting stuff. Orin Condemnation. Kill an attacking enemy unit, you gain armor equal to its strength. I'm surprisingly not too fond of this one. Like, it's kind of like an execute, but you also get some bonuses to armor, so if you want to play this in an armory deck, I think is essentially the idea. The thing is, with armory decks, I feel like you are pretty consistently in a situation where you are playing all of your power every turn just to stay alive, like you're playing Harsh Roll to clear the board, you're playing your actual relic, which it rarely lasts for more than one turn. So like, you know, on turn 4 you're going to play an Auric Runehammer, and then having an Orin Condemnation on turn 5 would be great, but like the chance that if you already have like the relic weapon out, you're probably reasonably happy with what you're already doing, and you probably will spend the relic then killing something else. So like, yeah, the armor value aspect of it is really interesting, providing value to relic weapons, but I don't know that it actually strengthens relic weapons game all that much. It's kind of an interesting spell, and you would probably include it in an armory list, but I'd rate it like a C in power level, or maybe a C-. I'm just skeptical that it's actually going to see that much play, and particularly in Throne Armory, where like maybe you just use relic weapons to kill things, and Harsh Roll, and all of the Fall to Ruins, and there's still a lot of options to clear out stuff that are like basically the thing that armory decks need is not typically the ability to gain armor so much as the ability to clear out massive amounts of units, and killing single units that are a problem is not typically a thing that armory has tremendous issues with. So this can solve a specific problem in the market, and for that I think it's a reasonable card, and I don't think it's necessarily terrible in certain armory lists, so I wouldn't like rate it as like an absolute failure or anything like that. It just doesn't strike me as super powerful in those circumstances. But Expedition removal is nice, and it does kill any attacking enemy unit, which is that's a little bit stronger. Certainly Orin Condemnation is a card that you really have to look out for there. I think in Expedition I probably should give it a little more credit. I would rate it at maybe like a B power level, because killing any unit that is attacking you and also getting health is pretty nice, and relic weapons aside, that actually seems pretty reasonable. I don't know. I might be giving that one far too little credit. I will admit that like the armor value like early before you play the relic is significantly better, so not completely unreasonable. Jaina Peacekeeper. Stealth 4/5. When it blocks or is blocked, play a Justice Sigil from your deck depleted, and Jaina gets -4 this turn. He's decent. Yeah, this is a lot of good things in one go. You get to play Justice Sigils, which is generally better than drawing Justice Sigils. So you get pretty significant card advantage if this card sticks around. And it's going to stick around fairly likely because it's a stealth unit with 5 health. So yeah, this card will very, very likely be available to block on the turn that it's played. At that point, it will ramp you at least once, and then you can probably attack with it and either deal 4 damage to your opponent or get another Justice Sigil. That seems like a pretty good set of plays overall. Obviously, the card is still vulnerable to removal, so, you know, it can be defiled, it can be killed by anything that kills stealth units, but, like, as far as stealth units go, this is pretty cream of the crop. This is top-end stealth unit. I would say this is, like, a power level by far, and it's the kind of stealth unit that you'd actually play in a Throne deck, like a Martial Ironthorn list or something along those lines. This card's super strong. It's really, really good at ramping you, and that's the main thing that it has to be really good at. In situations where it doesn't ramp you, it is still providing you with a soldier and also providing you with some serious tempo. So yeah, I think this card seems really, really sweet, even if it doesn't trade with stuff very often, and by and large, that's probably reason enough to keep it. Eventually this card does become like sort of card neutral. Like if you don't get to get like at least 2 attacks with it, then your opponent can be like, oh, I blocked this with a 3/3 and a 2/2, and it's like, oh, I'm a 0/5, I die immediately. But the benefit of that is that you still get to ramp. So if you're thrown and you're looking for Martyr's Chains or Martial Ironthorn, you're super happy. And if you're an expedition and you're just looking to hit like a 6-drop of some kind or a Mantle of Justice or anything along those lines, yeah, super sweet. Also, the card can still carry weapons because it has 5 health. So you put a Mantle of Justice on this, you're not feeling super unhappy because then the card's even bigger, and even though it can get -4 strength, it won't change that. Like that won't happen like from multiple blocks or anything like that, so you can still deal damage if you put weapons on it. Yeah, card's really, really good, and fits really well, and the drawback is not really all that much of a drawback. Dazzling Revelation. Stun 3 attacking enemy units. So it's a flash freeze, but you can only do it to attacking units. Very high specificity to this card, but it is a very powerful way to make an aggro deck cry. This gives you like flash freeze level effects. Yeah, I would say this card is pretty reasonable. Like, it is a good way to avoid tempo for a while and really mess up things that are hurting you for a pretty long period of time. There are still some like things that are maybe not so great about it. Like, for one, it stuns 3 attacking enemy units, and the thing that's going on in Expedition right now is creatures attacking you with 2 attacking enemy units pretty consistently. So Dazzling Revelation will frequently miss its mark and maybe not stun as many units as you are hoping for, or maybe not get quite the results that you want. It won't help against an Anglo Houndmaster, because Houndmaster will still play a Hound. I mean, you'll be able to stop the effect, but then they've still got a ton of value on the board that's eventually going to unstun. So this card only buys you time, and it is tempo inefficient on that respect, but like it's nonetheless like a pretty strong effect for neutralizing cards, and you can get some decent benefit out of it. Doesn't recur very well in Davia, so I wouldn't see it in a lot of Expedition decks, but I could see it in Throne against certain formats. I can definitely see it as a market card, and like overall seems like something that you might be okay with playing with, even if it isn't a way to win the game like Flash Freeze is. It's more of a way to get yourself into a position to win the game. So yeah, maybe a B- in strength. I think it is good, but it never really defines the deck that you're in. It just saves your bacon and helps you get the deck set up. That being said, there are a lot of like interesting stun effects that you can play with in Huru, so this is a card that can really do quite a lot of work under the right circumstances, and it'll make the aggro decks cry pretty well. Whether or not you want to do that as opposed to like Cyber Combustion or Cover from the Storm may end up being a question for the ages. We'll see. Iron Ursa. 3 cost, 3/2. Overwhelm, Reckless, Stealth, Intrigue 2/2/2. Ultimate, when the enemy player plays a spell, reveal Iron Ursa to negate it. Big fan of this card. It's a 3-cost bear that counters a spell on the turn it's played, and the turn it's played is pretty good for countering spells, and also it's a stealth unit, which means it draws spells to it like flies. People really like to silence stealth units. People really like to play burn spells on stealth units. People really like to know what's underneath that particular hood. So it's really possible that Iron Ursa is an Overwhelm Reckless unit that you are going to play down on turn 3, and then your opponent is going to spend their next turn learning that they shouldn't have learned what it is. That's a neat little trick. I think that Huru aggro is maybe not a super well-played archetype, so like this card adds a lot of strength to that setup, but it is a Grenadin bear, and there's a lot of interesting things going on with that. But like, I love everything about it for flavor. I love everything about it for style, but I just don't know what deck it belongs in necessarily, because Huru aggro is just like, it's there. And like Grenadin aggro is still really tricky for people to play. People really don't like it very much or don't really go with it very often. This is a strong reason to do that. Bear aggro is not really a thing yet, but this is clearly a card that lends itself to that. So like all the decks it currently goes into are a little janky and weird. But this seems like a real up-and-comer for that. I would say I'd give it a B. I think it's really powerful. I don't know that blue is really powerful in this type of format where you're being aggressive and countering out spells as they're played. But like it's pretty tempo efficient and it's pretty effective at what it does. Elixir, Unspoken Terror. Pay 3 to deal 1 damage to an enemy. Summons, transform each card with cost 6 or more in each hand and void into a random card of the same faction. So speaking of blue tempo cards, 4/5 for 4, still a really good stat line. Pay 3 to deal 1 damage to an enemy. Decent effect that actually allows you to clear out a large number of units and get some interesting card advantage. Or trigger a number of other options. You can give the card deadly, you can do lots of interesting shenanigans with it, and having cards that that have this ability is consistently a feature in certain types of decks. If you want to play Waxing Moon, for example, in Expedition, or if you want to play the equivalent that gives all your units deadly in Throne, or if you want to just play like with a bunch of transform cards and mandrakes and stuff like that, there are a bunch of different deck archetypes that are already pretty strong that Elixir belongs in. And also Elixir is well statted, and also Elixir has an ability that messes with people's control decks, because this makes it so that Channel the Tempest becomes like a Yeti Spy or something along those lines. It can hurt you in that way. It's not like discarding the card, and it can also like trigger a lot of interesting stuff like Mind Link and other stuff like that. There's some interesting value to Elixir's ability. I think that it is very, very fun for flavor and very inconsistent for power, but nonetheless it is a well-statted unit. I would definitely give it like a B-, probably, maybe a B. Card is good at what it does. What it does is very consistent, but nothing that is like broken or overpowered has ever really come out of these types of decks. Beyond the deadly, like the deadly Linray thing actually did get a lot of value for a while. So there are some pretty insane decks that run this. Nonetheless, pretty cool card, really good stat line, really good ability, and very good like sort of extra text on top of it. Sinister Rumors. 1 cost, kill an exhausted enemy unit with 3 strength or less, or draw a unit from your void. So Dark Return effect, nice. The enemy player discards each copy of a spell of your choice from their deck. So this can completely take a problem card out of your opponent's deck. It can wreck a unit that you really don't like, that is exhausted for some reason. And it can do Dark Return, which, Dark Return is... the +1/+1 on Dark Return has always mattered, and all of the cards that emulate it without the +1/+1 have frequently been not as powerful, just because recursion on things that gives you extra bonuses is just really, really strong in Eternal for reasons. But this is a really modal card that also has Dark Return attached to it, so there's no way I'm not giving this like an A in Throne and probably Expedition as well. Like, this is a card that, like, I would say it is just very, very good for what it does, and also allows you to effectively hamstring a particular type of deck or a particular strategy. Anything that is reliant on only one card, you can mess with that deck, especially if you know exactly what it is. So that's something where like the top level play on this is pretty strong, and the ability to just pull it out of your market and throw it into somebody's face is something that is like really relevant and will be seen, I think, on occasion in tournament play. Drawing a unit from your void is a really, really strong effect that you are happy to have multiple versions of. If you want to play like Endra, Champion of Shavka, or anything like that, there's yet another card that fits in that deck, and that deck's super fun. And if you just need to kill an aggro card, that you've got that extra bonus. So super modal charm, does a lot of cool things, really, really effective at what it does. Very, very powerful. I'd give it an A in both of them. I wouldn't say that it's broken in either one of them, but there are a lot of recursive decks that really, really are happy to have this. Mimicry Vine! Stealth 3/3. When one or more of your other units use ultimate or summon abilities, reveal Mimicry Vine to have them get those effects again. I love this card, and I would give it an F for power level, because it does the thing that I said, which is it fails at its own mission. So yeah, there are a lot of problems with this card overall. First off, does trigger summon abilities really well, particularly 4-cost summon abilities. There aren't a lot of those in Expedition. I think in Throne this is pretty reasonable. But like, yeah, so first off, the card is bugged. And I think that once those bugs are resolved, this card does get a little bit better. Right now, when you play it, and then you play another copy of it, both copies reveal each other, and nothing happens. So yeah, if you want to live the ultimate benefit of like basically having like multiple summon effects go off in tandem with each other after playing like 4 Mimicry Vines in a row, that doesn't work. And even if your opponent doesn't interact with you, which they're going to, you're just not going to get that effect because you'll interact with yourself and blow yourself up. That's super. You can get 2 Mimicry Vines out by playing Reflector into Mimicry Vine, and in that case you'll have 2 Mimicry Vines, and then when you play a unit with a summon effect or you play an ultimate effect, only one of them will trigger, because Mimicry Vine for some reason like doesn't have the code to trigger when there are 2 of them out in the first place. There's just nothing that actually allows you to do that. So yeah, this card is... I'm frustrated with the level of bugs with this card, considering that both of these are effects that trigger just when you have 2 Mimicry Vines in play. Like, it's not interactions with other cards really that make it happen, it's interactions with itself. So that's a frustrating thing in terms of like the to talk about in terms of like the bug fixing in Eternal. Like, Eternal has been pretty buggy as of late, I think, and that's yeah, hopefully these are fixed soon. In any case, once this card is fixed, I think it's still like a D+. Like, it is really, really fun to repeat ultimate effects and to repeat summon effects, and both of those things like really kind of lead you into some pretty interesting stuff. We had a lot of fun finding out that it does in fact work with Grand Influencer, and you can play that down after on 4, and you can get both 3 time and 3 primal, or like something like that, and you can actually like pick both effects simultaneously. It doesn't double up, so that means that you get the ability to like really effectively decide like what your targets are when you're playing stuff off of ultimates and summons. If you want to deal 4 damage to a target, you'll probably be able to deal 4 damage to another target, that kind of thing. So yeah, the effect is really powerful when it goes off, but stealth units have this alarming tendency to be revealed a lot, and then you'll oftentimes, if you build a deck around Mimicry Vine, I think you'll oftentimes find yourself in a situation where you have the Mimicry Vines and you're searching for the card that will actually trigger off of Mimicry Vine, especially since like some of the ultimate effects you might be going for are like stealth effects or something along those lines. Yeah, this could go up to like as far as like a C+. I think it is reasonable on its own, but like basically you're playing something just to duplicate an effect that you're going to be playing on like turn 4 or something like that, and you're not going to do it consistently. So at that point, it might be better to get something that actually does that like a little more consistently. I think Reflector actually does a better job frequently of duplicating certain effects as well. But like, yeah, it's kind of in there. I like the card a lot. I will give it more of a chance, but I do think that this is a card that will frequently trap you if you're trying to play multiple summon effects at the same time. When you do get it off, it's really, really fun, and we will be releasing a deck that plays with Mimicry Vine because I think it's amazingly fun. I just think the power level is not quite there. Very interesting card, though. Not really sure what's going on with the flavor. Don't know why it's a Mimicry Vine. Don't see what it's mimicking. It just seems to have a lot of teeth. There's no mimicking happening there. Maybe it's pretending to be a bug? I'm not sure. Inevitable Corruption. Choose even or odd. The enemy player discards all non-power cards with that cost from their hand. So yeah, this is pay 5 to potentially discard your opponent's entire even-handed hand. Kind of fun. An even-handed golem deck is not going to be too affected by this because it already got like a bunch of units down in the time that it was doing all those draws, and then it's probably going to be able to continue to draw things even after you inevitably corrupt it. And also this card is 5 to make people discard cards. There's a 4-cost card that steals an opponent's card and puts the card into your hand. That's really, really good card advantage. It tends to be like a 2-for-1 in some really good ways, and it is not played very often because it's way too slow. Inevitable Corruption is 5-cost discard that only works if you win a guessing game, and if you win the guessing game, you might be able to discard their entire hand or just some of the cards that they have. That's a lot to ask. There are plenty of different cards that have these types of guessing games that are attached to actual units. There's Gentleman June, who allows you to discard people down to like 2, but is a 5-cost unit that actually does some other stuff. Yeah, I'm not really sure what this card is aimed at. I would give this an F for power level just because it is targeted at even-handed decks in some ways, or at least at like decks that are very, very weird. It's kind of a safety valve for them, but it's so expensive and so tempo inefficient and so like just not fun to play with that I really doubt that people will be taking it, and I really doubt that it will have a huge effect on those types of decks. Can come in as a market card. When it comes in as a market card, it's even more expensive to play, so I'm skeptical. Varbuk, Hand of Anarchy. Charge Valor 4/3, summon kill an enemy multi-faction unit or relic. This is a much better version of the 2/2 that did the same thing. For 4, that was, I think, double Shadow. So this card has a really, really steep influence cost, which does actually make a difference into whether or not it can be played. I think that you have to play pretty solid Rakano to run into this, and also it's a Rakano 4-drop without Warcry. It does have Charge, which is a reasonable effect. That means you can deal 4 damage for 4. Okay. And it has Valor, which means that it's much harder to block. It's still not super well statted. It dies to Torch, which I think is a big issue in terms of its viability in Throne. Like anything that takes 3, like, this thing can be flash fried, this thing can be killed by just a wide variety of cards that deal damage to stuff. Conflagrate, Hailstorm, Cover from the Storm, Cyber Combustion. There's just a lot of things that kill 3 health units, and it's still not a very good health number to be at. And 3 health Valor units are always a little tricky because they tend to be like really overstated for when they're trading, but really understated for their cost when they're not. So yeah, that's a little tricky. On the other hand, this card does actually hit units or relics. I kind of wish it hit sites as well, just because like Rakano aggro stuff really wants to do that kind of thing. But yeah, the main issue is like whether or not your opponent's going to have multi-faction stuff down. And multi-faction hate has not been particularly successful previously, but I would still give this card probably like a B minus in power level. I think that it is doing enough things with enough stats that it can feasibly be okay in the places that it wants to be. So like, yeah, it's just a little hard to see it belonging in stuff, so maybe more like a C+ in power level. It's okay in Expedition. It's not really going to see a lot of play in Throne, but potentially if you're just up against all multi-faction decks, Varbuk, Hand of Anarchy can do a lot of things there. Yeah, and the card is just relatively tempo efficient if you can actually get the removal. If you can't, it's a okay unit that can at least be Warcried up to being kind of effective. Charge is generally a useful stat to have, and you can do some interesting things with it if you get enough Warcries out. Hex Driver, 2/3 Relic Weapon. When you play a spell, it gets +2 strength this turn. I like a lot of things about this card. Skycrag typically does not have cards with more health than strength, but a 3-cost 2/3 is... it's crossing the line a little bit in terms of stats because like it's really not very good overall. Like there's a 2-cost 2/3 Injustice that does a similar thing and doesn't have the spell effect, but like, so this is a relic weapon that is like a little understated if you don't get the spell bonus. If you get the spell bonus, then it becomes a 4/3. The thing I like about it is that it does have 3 health, so it is a card that if you kill a 2/2 with it on turn 3, you're fairly likely to kill a 4/4 with it on turn 4. Is that a reason enough to play it? Maybe in Expedition. I would give this card like a C+ in Expedition. In Throne, I really doubt it. The ability to just like spell out your opponent with like a bunch of like interesting effects and get like a huge Hex Driver for the turn is really exciting, and there's some interesting things that can be built around that idea. But in general, those types of cantripping decks are not typically so strong that they're going to be outrageous, and Hex Driver does not have enough stats to really make that work under the right circumstances. I don't know. Maybe there's some room for like red, blue, green armory or something like that, where you play with the new removal card. You get up a bunch of armor, then you play Hex Driver, and then you just start like wrathing the board. And then every time you wrath the board, the card has 4 attack, which is, I mean, that's kind of a tempting offer, right? Like a 3-cost relic that you can then immediately start getting into your Death Strikes or your whatever, and cover from the storms, and just clearing the board over and over again. I could maybe see an Expedition deck that really, really plays with this. So I think the jury's out on this one. I don't think it's a powerful card, but like, yeah, there may be an Armory Expedition deck that really actually does use Cyber Combustion and Cover from the Storm and Fall to Ruin or something along those lines, and kind of simulates what Red, Green, Purple Armory was doing in Throne. I think in Throne, Hex Driver seems much less likely to be played, but it's an interesting one. Kahanya, Skilled Caster, Endurance 2/4, summon silence an enemy unit with cost 2 or less, or deal 2 damage to an enemy player or site. This is a modal card where I'm not as fond of all of the things that are happening with it. Hybrid for a 3-cost 2/4 is mediocre stats. Like 2/5 is maybe a little bit better at that point. When you have Endurance, like the card is going to be okay at blocking, but it's frequently just going to get run over by Finest Hour, as is fairly common with these types of cards. It does allow you to mess with aggro cards, and I think the silencing of Danglo Houndmaster is something that in particular Elysian decks are going to be really looking for. The 2 damage to an enemy player site is like super minor and doesn't affect a lot of the current sites in Expedition or in Throne. There are 2 health sites, and so this can kill sites that have those issues, but most of the sites actually have 3 health. So when your opponent plays a site, if you're playing Kahanya Skilled Caster after that, you're getting a unit that can't attack through into the site, deals some damage to the site, and then can block units. Like, that's all it can do. It can't really pressure because it's a 2/4. So, like, yeah, this thing gets regularly stymied by 3/3s and just doesn't really trade with stuff of its own level. The silence ability affects mostly units that you don't really need to silence all that often. The fact that it hits Overloader and Houndmaster and a couple of other things are what make it a potential meta pick for Expedition, but like, this is like, I would give this like a solid F in Throne, and I'd really only give it like a D+ in Expedition. I'm just really skeptical that this card is going to see as much play as it wants to, just because everything about it just doesn't quite work. It doesn't have good tempo, it doesn't block really all that well, and the summon ability is good, but it's not necessarily good enough to include 4 of it in a deck. And when you do include 4 of it in a deck, are you dealing with enough units or spells to really make it worth it? I think in a world where like you just absolutely get the silence every time, or you kill a site every time, Kahanya is really quite good. But like, if you're not getting the silence or the damage, then the card's not providing you with too much. At least there's a little reach in it. The fact that it does damage the enemy player if you don't have anything else to do is kind of nice, and almost puts it up at the point where it actually has some offensive tempo. But I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical of this one. A Zindole Mastermind, 4/4 Lifesteal Stealth, ultimate at the start of your turn. Reveal a Zindole to play the top card of each player's deck. The Zindole gets +2/+2 for each power card played this way. 5-cost stealth cards with reveal are not insanely powerful, so I would only ever give this like as high as like a B. But the card has a lot going for it. It has Lifesteal, which is a really useful effect to have on a stealth card. It can be as big as an 8/8 on the turn that it attacks, which is pretty fancy. And also it gets to play the top card of both players' decks, which is a really, really powerful effect to get. If this card goes off, it is like A+, like top tier, excellent card to be going for. If this card gets removed, which is a thing that happens, I think, pretty frequently, or if it gets silenced, or if there's like some reason that it like hits a dud card, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in between its attack and the point that it's played. But like, if everything goes right, this card's super, super strong. And also notably, steals Warcry cards while also playing super expensive cards. Traditional to most of the Azindoles. Azindole the Wayfinder and Azindole the like 7/7 monster Radiant. Both are really good at like stealing cards and playing them for cheap, or playing cards for cheap in general, and just playing in very, very large cards. So if you want to build a deck that's oops all Azindoles, this card really fits well in that type of deck. And yeah, look very often to Azindole's Wrath or the Invoke the Waystones deck, because this is like exactly that kind of card. It does the same types of things where it gets to play really expensive cards for free or cheap, and you get some awesome benefits from it. And if you don't play a card for cheap, then you still get a 6/6 or an 8/8 because you played a power off the top of your deck, which I think is a really nice way to sort of balance out the randomness of that ability. I like this card a lot. It gets an A+ for design for me. I think it's a wonderful card for Xenon, and it's super fun to play. And we, of course, immediately spent some time building some interesting Mimicry Vine decks with it, and that's why we know so much about Mimicry Vine. But like, yeah, this card is only like so powerful. I still think that it's good. I think that it provides you with a lot of card advantage if it triggers. If it doesn't trigger, it's still an okay body, and like this is at least going to draw a removal card, which is something that you really, really want, especially since it like makes it so that if you're playing Xenon, your opponent's playing into Subversion Slug, which means you can play the two of them together and get like a pretty decent setup going where your opponent just kind of has to make some bad decisions as to whether or not they're going to fight this or not. It's not going to knock anyone's socks off every time, because it's a little inconsistent as to what it's doing, even though it is card advantage every time. I like it a lot. It definitely, like, it's up there in like a Invoke the Waystones power level, where I think it's just a solid B. It is good in the decks it's good in. It's just not quite consistent enough to be perfectly good all the time. Final Confrontation. Each player chooses one of their units, kill the rest. Harder card to rate, but can consistently allow you to kill a lot of your opponent's stuff while building a very big, scary unit. I think this is pretty reasonable overall. Like, you're probably going to have a decently well-statted green unit that you can double up in power over and over again. And if you are up against a big aggro deck and you just want to clear out the board while you're playing with your big stealth unit or your wall or your big ol' nonsense monster, this works out pretty well. Like, it's not a bad follow-up to just playing like Tarja and getting the double up where you get the 6/6 with Warcry 4, and then you Final Confrontation, you clear out just about everything, so you can then evenly trade in. You can attack right after this is done. It's not a harsh rule, so it's not harsh rule strength, and the conditionality of it is that you do leave your opponent with their favorite unit while also leaving you with only your favorite unit, so it affects both players a little more equally and also allows your opponent to make better decisions as to what they need to win or to beat you out. So to that extent, I would say this is only ever like as high as like a B- in power level, and it's near to non-existent in power level in Throne, because in Throne you just play Leave a Witness. I would be surprised if this sees play out of Expedition. So like D in Throne, I'm gonna say B- in Expedition, but maybe a C+. Like, really, really not quite there. Waystone Alignment. Start of your turn, sacrifice Waystone Alignment to kill each unit, relic, and site with cost equal to 1. Amplify 2, increase that cost by 1. This is a colorless only Wrath, and true to the power of colorless only cards in general, it's not very good. Like, it's a C, it does okay things, but it takes an entire turn to activate, and during that time a lot of stuff can happen. The relic can get destroyed, the units can get Aegis, a lot of other things can happen that are just not all that great. In addition, you are paying a significant cost to destroy cards of the particular cost and type that you want to destroy. If you play this against a site, if you want to like destroy a bastion, for example, or something like that, let's say that the card that you want to destroy is a 4-cost site, that like Lord Styre's Tower. You have to pay 7 per Waystone Alignment, and then the site still gets to activate, play a spell, which probably won't give you anything else that you want to kill. And then, at the start of your turn, if your opponent hasn't played Relic Destruction off of the site, which a lot of sites do include Relic Destruction in their own, then you get to blow up the site and anything that you have that costs the same amount and anything your opponent has that costs the same amount. That's, like, it's just a lot. I think this card is just never that strong. It is okay to be playing, particularly if you can reduce the Amplify card down, and, like, the ability to, like, sort of set this up in a market is kind of alright, but yeah, this is, like, D- power level. It's not a card that you really are too excited to play, except in the certain circumstances. I think it has, like, the ring of a powerful card. There are like time bomb type effects that have this ability in Magic in particular that play with a lot of amplifies and basically like get that type of effect going on. And they are like really, really strong EDH cards or really, really strong commander cards because like they have that ability to just pick out a particular thing that is very problematic, deal with it. To that extent, like if Eternal ever gets like a commander format, that's something worth considering because you always want like extra versions of this type of thing. But yeah, like this is so conditional and the power level of it is so weird and the format is so fast and both formats are so fast that I think that it's not really worth playing. Probably just a flat F, but that's what it is. It's a colorless card, so it is not expected to be insanely strong. It's expected to fill a void that maybe you don't have. If you don't have the ability to wrath the board, that is your pseudo-wrath that you can use in Primal or in Fire or in Shadow if you're not playing Fall to Ruin now, because Fall to Ruin is a thing that happens. In any case, there's some potential there to do some interesting nonsense and wreck things that are a little bit small or break things that generally don't do other stuff. And like the ability to just kill everything that has cost equal to 1 is kind of nice against aggro. Same for cost equal to 2. Like you can do some good things against aggro with this card. So there's something for you. Okay, and that is all of the cards. As you can see, there's some really, really good build around me. There's a couple of good, really strong throne cards in my opinion, and like interesting cards for draw go. Having the first fast relic is really, really interesting, and overall, like this is a pretty worthwhile campaign to purchase. A lot of fun stuff in there, a lot of interesting things to play with. I like the set overall. I think this was a cool one to be breaking down, and I'm excited to be playing with some of these cards in the future. We're definitely going to be putting out a Mimicry Mastermind deck very soon, so stay tuned for that. We're also going to be putting out, I think, some more Storybook Ball videos because I'm really, really enjoying that at the moment. And should be rebranding soon, I think probably at the end of the month. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff. Stay tuned. Feel free to subscribe if you liked our stuff and you want to see more. And you can find me at Twitch TV as Loco Hojo for the foreseeable future. 7 p.m. PSTs, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Some final life updates. I am moving to Denver, so I am going to be a little bit busy in the next week. Some of the updates might be a little bit sparser, and it's going to be a bit interesting for a bit, but at the end of it, we will have a new house with a new place that should be a good streaming spot with good friends there and good mental health, good everything all around. So I'll see you there when I see you. And in the meantime, we're still going to be putting up videos and streaming on Twitch. So see you then. Bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.